Move on to oil. Assessing risk in the oil and gas space was a key focus of oil and gas executives at the recently held International Conference on African Oil, held in Cape Town, South Africa. Safety, regulatory compliance, price volatility, and increasing challenges associated with assessing reserves and markets were among the top risks highlighted. Elias Pugong, a partner, Africa Oil and Gas at Ernst & Young, joins us on the line from Cameroon to give us his perspective on the risks of Africa's oil industry. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, let's talk about how in your view, does the risk in Africa's oil sector compare with elsewhere across the world?
Hello, Wole. Good afternoon. Thanks for calling that back. I think we've seen a lot of similarities in the risks and opportunities in Africa compared to the other parts of the world. We have this year, what actually surprised us is health, safety, and environment, which came up the top of the list. I think what happened in New Mexico, the oil spill in New Mexico, has affected the survey. But the traditional risks remain: uncertainty, energy policy, worsening fiscal terms, human capital deficits. All those traditional risks in the oil and gas space that we know in Africa still features very strongly in this survey.
Talk about the risks associated with reserves. I believe that major investments in this sector are driven by the expectations linked to reserves. What's your take on the risk of that going forward?
Actually, I think the risk with improved technology, I think we are, the sector is really getting above, on top of this risk. We just came through, as you said earlier, from this major international conference, Africa Oil Week, which is the real Indaba, or the jamboree for all oil and gas actors in Africa. And what really struck me was the new oil provinces, the new oil countries coming into the, outside the traditional guys that we all know, Nigeria and Angola. We've seen some new countries surfacing, going from Liberia, Sierra Leone, right through to Kenya, Ethiopia, and even Madagascar. Countries you will never imagine that they will find oil. So, in as much as we highlight the access to reserve as being a risk, we also see it as being a big opportunity as well.
Right, so that risk is a bit low in African context in your view. But let's move on to other issues. Over the last 5 years, we've seen several African countries address the legal framework for the industry. In Ghana, a local content law was passed recently. And of course, in Nigeria, the Petroleum Industry Bill is still in Parliament. To what extent are the changes to regulation reducing the risk associated with investing in the oil industry on the continent in your view?
Absolutely. We consider that the regulatory framework was a key risk, but I think this risk has been featured for the last 2-3 years on this survey. But I think African governments have really taken that to heart. We have seen a sea change in the regulatory environment right across the continent. You've mentioned Ghana, you've mentioned Nigeria, but you have to know that the PIB still has to go through Parliament, which has been dragging on for a while. But if you look right across East Africa, Tanzania has made a lot of progress. Kenya is progressing. Mozambique is doing the same. So I think as much as we highlight this risk, from my perspective, we are seeing improvement. Governments are responding and are putting into place proper regulatory framework. So I think we have an improving picture. It's a risk, but I think the picture is improving going forward.
Right. Okay. So what about demand? What's the assessment of the risk of a decline in the demand for African oil globally?
I mean, the risk of African oil demand. I think if you look at that in our survey, you see that we highlight that as an opportunity. Because we're seeing growth in some of the emerging markets in the Far East, in China, in India, in South Korea. And this has increased the demand for African oil. So we see that more of an opportunity for us here in Africa.
Right. But won't you say, given what's happening in the U.S., for instance, with the discoveries over there and the expectations for how much they will be delivering to global supplies, doesn't that impact, even if it's several countries or specific countries, don't you think the African continent is exposed at all to that decline in demand because of discoveries elsewhere across the world?
I think the U.S. is the particular case that we're looking for, that you're referring to. Yes, Shell, which is the shale gas, and it's going to affect the balance of demand and supply. We know that. But my view is that, I mean, it was mentioned extensively at the conference. My view is that we have to wait and see. Because even if U.S. supply increases, demand also increases as well. So we need to really wait and see how this is going to balance all out. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. We really have to, I think the jury is still out as far as that is concerned.